hello again, everybody. It's been a while, hasn't it? How are you all keeping? Fantastic to have another wonderful panel. Now, Charlotte, bless you. When I was looking up all our panellists, I know Jo relatively well. We met once or twice, haven't we? And I was like, oh, Charlotte, I can't quite place Charlotte. I don't think I've met Charlotte. I know, I'll Google image search her. Not a single photograph of Charlotte came up. So we need to get Charlotte into some kind of photographic studio so that we know what she looks like. But you're very welcome. Amy Clarke here is Deloitte Sport Business Group Women's Sport Lead. Charlotte, Manchester City Women's Managing Director, Charlotte O'Neill. Luca Russo, thank you so much for joining us as well. Volante Sports Director. You might recognise the surname, you might not. Alessia Russo is his sister, in case you're wondering, because that would just annoy you if you were. Is it not? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And Jo Tung, another WIF legend who's been on the board of Women in Football for a very, 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 very long time, making a practical difference to women working in the game, and has her own agency. She's CEO of Tongue Tied Management. So lots of people to do all the talking on our behalf today. First of all, just a little bit of background, if you wouldn't mind, as to your role in football.
Sure. So Women's Sport Lead for Deloitte Sports Business Group. So for those of you who don't know us, we're a team of around 50 sports specialists working full-time across the market, and we've been working on the development of women's sport for over a decade now. What does that mean? So we work with FIFA, for example, on the Women's Football Benchmarking Report, looking at the global market data. We work with leagues and organisations like the WNBA, the NWSL, looking at their key strategic issues. And we also work with clubs on some of their strategies around the women's game and, you know, what can they do for revenue maximisation. I was privileged to have been a part of Karen Carney's review panel over the last year. And I've also been really working hard on our data and insights, making sure that we have the data we need to demonstrate the growth of women's football.
Revenue maximisation of women's football. Yes, please, more of that. Thank you. We'll hear more shortly. Oh, Charlotte.
So I've been Managing Director of Man City Women for 3 months. Until last Thursday, I was unbeaten as a managing director, so that was my claim to fame. I didn't know what anyone was worrying about. This whole football thing's really easy. You just turn up and they just win. And then Thursday night, unfortunately, we were knocked out of the League Cup, and then followed it up on Sunday with a loss to Spurs away, which was tough, but we're still very much in the WSL title race, which is exciting. My background is I was an England and Super League netball player, and then I went and worked on 2 Olympic Games, Beijing, London, in aquatic sports, so swimming, diving, synchro, water polo, open water. I can still remember all 5. And then I went to work on the Rugby World Cup and joined City in 2015 in the Boys Academy. So I was Director of Operations and Development, and then went on to become Academy Director, and then moved over to the women. So I suppose, have been a woman outside of football, and now I'm a woman in football, been on the boys' side, and this is my first foray into women's football. So I'm not an expert, but I'm learning and really very much enjoying it. That's me.
Thank you. Luca.
Awesome. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I got the last minute call up last night to come in, so put me in coach. My background is, unlike Jo, we get the dirty reputation of the agents in the world, unfortunately masked by quite a few dodgy ones, but I like to think that we're one of the good ones. Work with talent in the game, so players and some managers. My background originally, when I was growing up, I was a runner, so I wasn't necessarily in the ins and outs of the game. Went into coaching, and then kind of fell into it. Was along the journey with my sister, and I kind of knew enough to get involved, and saw some things that I thought I could do really well with. And it was as the game was sort of professionalising. So been in the game since 2018, and been very fortunate to be a front row witness of how it's boomed over the last few years.
Those Russo genes are strong, right? There's no mistaking that.
Well, I didn't get any of them, so.
Yeah, your genes are strong as well. Journalism from your dad, Steve.
Yep, so I'm Jo Tung, for anyone who I've not met. There's loads of new faces here today, which is wicked, so do come and say hi if I've not met you. I've been involved with Women in Football since probably the first event in West Ham, which was 2007. I think, as Helen's nodding, I think Helen was definitely there. I think we had 25, maybe 30 people there. And I was actually a sports journalist at the time at the BBC. Patricia Gregory's also here, who was one of my sort of women I idolised at the BBC. And I started in men's football, so I actually then became an agent in men's football and moved across to women's football in 2012 when we had the Olympics here, and I thought we were onto something and women's football was going to suddenly become huge. We had these sporting icons that we were going to see in London 2012, and along with how we saw them in athletics, we were going to see them in football, and women's football was going to be the next big thing. So I signed 3 of the 2012 team. And the next year came around and nothing really happened for them. And then the next year came around and nothing really happened for them. And the game was growing slowly, but I mean, I was laughing with Annie, who was one of my first clients this morning. I used to go to Chelsea and take my dog with me, like genuinely. I used to say, can I bring the dog? Because I haven't got a dog sitter this weekend. So me and Theo, the dog, used to go and stand on the terraces. So when you get days like the Euros final, or even at the Emirates, where there's 60,000 of us last week, it's just mental for me. So yeah, pleased to be here, and it's really nice to see some new faces.
Yeah, the game's grown exponentially since those days, hasn't it? My goodness. And work to do, which is where you come in, Amy. You talked about those fabulous words, revenue maximisation, when it comes to the women's game. Just tell us a bit more about what your report found.
Yeah, so we've been, as I said, working really hard around the data over the last couple of years, and the growth that we've seen is huge, even in the past year, never mind the last 5 to 10. So a few years ago, we set out to value the global elite women's sport market. And at the time, actually, the data was so sporadic, we couldn't get to values even, and where we could, they were very low. We didn't actually publish the value at that time, but a few years on, we now predict that those revenues from global women's sport are going to break £1 billion over the next year, and that's a 300% increase on what we saw the previous time we did it, which is huge. And football obviously makes up a huge proportion of that. Just looking at WSL revenues over the past 2 seasons, they've grown 60% each season. But actually what's really interesting about it, and you're getting a bit of an insight into what I find interesting here, but bear with me. That 60% revenue growth, it's not just defined by a single business model. So the ways that different clubs are making money are completely different, and that's amazing because, we're not copying the men's template by focusing on the broadcast revenues to drive that growth. Some clubs, even within the same league, so we see Arsenal made over 60% of their revenues from matchday sources, whilst United, within the WSL, made over 70% of their revenues from commercial revenue. So imagine the potential when we seek to, maximise each of those revenue streams. We're seeing 60% revenue growth now. Imagine when we build that across the game, the growth that we could potentially see in the future.
When you say about Manchester United's mostly commercial revenues, through what exactly?
So we're seeing actually in their model, they're starting to attribute value from their broader commercial contracts. So for example, the cross-club contracts, we're seeing a real drive for clubs to apportion some of that revenues to the women's team and carve that out in the contracts. Whereas other clubs, for example, Chelsea, are also looking at being more commercially sustainable, but are doing that more by looking at getting individual deals for the women's team only and doing that in a slightly different way.
Okay. Charlotte, I'm slightly conscious of putting you on the spot. You've been there 3 months. I don't think I'd want to be particularly grilled in front of a whole, not that I'm grilling you, ask questions in front of a whole room here based on that. But from your experience so far and what you found from the City women's team, how do you find the business model there and what are you trying to achieve?
I mean, first and foremost, we want to win. Every year we want to be challenging for major trophies. So for me, it starts with that. So anything we do commercially or anything we do operationally all has to gear towards performance on the pitch. That's our priority. So if we're going to consistently challenge for major trophies, then we need the budget to do that. So that's when I naturally, as a sports person, super competitive, that's when I become way more interested in the numbers and the commercial side. And I think we probably have a strategy that's a little bit of a mix of all of them. So we're trying to drive greater value from our partners that are club partners and making sure that the amounts attributed to the women's team are reflective of the value that we hold within the club, our assets and our ability to storytell for brands, rather than getting a tiny percentage of the overall club thing where the men's game's getting everything and we just get a tiny slice. So making sure we have a bigger slice of, I like to talk about pies and chili, we'll get onto bakeries later and crumbs. Anyway, we want a bigger slice of the pie if it's a bigger brand. But likewise, we're also looking to, you know, more female-centric brands and doing, you know, unique partnerships. So does a tyre brand, you know, does that add value to our fans of the women's team? Maybe not, but actually does a beauty brand or skincare or, you know, Joy, we have Joy Stadium, it's a family brand, and that they wanted a specific partnership with us as a women's team. So yeah, we're looking at exploring every avenue to make sure, for me it's all about making sure you can drive value to have the best team on the pitch.
Yeah, and so do you see that in the short term that the best option to do that is to try and get, as you say, a larger slice of the pie that's available to Manchester City Football Club? And you go, hang on, we women need some of that, we need to continue to grow. But are you seeing that as a relatively short-term thing, as you alluded to there, and really actively looking outside and saying, well, actually, we're not Manchester City, definitely not Manchester United. You're not Manchester City FC, you're not them, you don't necessarily want the same partners, or is it a case of actually, let's share some of the partners in the future that work for both, but actually we can get so much more revenue by looking for completely different types of brands. Is that something you're actively doing now?
Absolutely. I would say the first point is, of the partners that you already have, make sure you've got a fair slice that reflects your value. The second piece is then go out and find partners that aren't attracted to the men's game, that are attracted to the women's game. So that is something that we're absolutely looking at. And then you've obviously got match day revenue, which every club has a really unique context, population context, fan base context, you know, size of home stadium, women's stadium, size of men's stadium. So I think that match day piece is really complex, and it really depends on what your internal, or what your own specific setup is as to which way you go with that.
Yeah, they're all different. I mean, Manchester United, Manchester City, Arsenal, Chelsea, plus all the others, have different ways of doing things. You all want to achieve similar things. You want to maximise revenue potential and all the rest of it. How much do you get your heads together and say, well, we're doing this and we're finding this is working? Or how much of it is a bit kind of like, we're going to do this and hopefully we'll get an edge over them?
I mean, I'm a veteran of 3 months, so I don't know too much. I see the leaders of the different clubs that I meet at matches, have former colleagues that are at different clubs as well. So, you know, I think a lot of what people are doing is out in the open anyway. You know, you don't have to be a football expert to realise that Arsenal are doing brilliant from a match day revenue point of view. You know, you can see if you sell out the Emirates, you're doing something right. So, and as a Tottenham fan, that's really painful to say. You know, it's like I said, it's you know, a lot of the stuff is out there, and look, it's for all of our benefits for the game and the league to be successful. So, you know, for me, of course, there's always that element of competition, but I don't think you have to look too far to see who's leading in certain areas.
It's been interesting working out in America, the NWSL, and seeing how much collaboration there is with the often female owners who are wanting to drive revenue, wanting to be better and inviting each other, come and have a look at this. And so, for example, Kansas City Current becoming the first women's football club to build their own purpose-built women's football stadium or women's sports stadium, and others are being invited along and putting it on social media going, hey, they've invited us along to see what we're doing, which is interesting to see. But there's obviously also that element of uber competitiveness. You all want to finish as high on the table, so I guess that's the balance. And Luca, just when was it you first started working in this area of football in terms of agency? How many years?
2018.
Okay, so you've seen the growth of the game go like that, large part due to your sister, but no, partly due to it. But you have a number of other players on your books as well, both in WSL and in the Championship. Yeah. You and Joe will have seen the game grow a great deal since then. Can you tell us what the challenges were then when you first came in? Was there anything you looked at and went, I cannot believe that that's the case, that's very different now? Or you still look at it and go, I cannot believe that's still the case?
I think, yeah, we've done amazing to elevate the top game, and the Emirates being sold out consistently is amazing. Arsenal doing great things at the top. A lot of these top clubs are doing really cool things, but there's still a huge gap between the top and the bottom. I think that's for me, that's the real judge of how far that we're gonna be going, because it's all well and good. The Lioness is doing amazing, Arsenal doing amazing, but if you can't bring the whole of the top tier along with you, then you're not really judging yourselves on the right thing, in my opinion anyway. I mean, we've got players, like you said, across the two leagues, and we've got, you know, people like Alessia, you know, the Lionesses do very well. but we've also got players that are across other clubs that are on London minimum, you know, and that's not because
Give us, what is that?
the London
much-
minimum wage.
Yeah, as in
I had an offer for 14 grand
Yeah.
from
for
a championship
championship club.
club of
And I
annual
said,
salary.
annual salary, and I said, they live in London, they can't, that's ridiculous. And they said, well, don't worry, we're going to train from 2 till 9 so they can have a job in the morning. I went, well, it's not professional football then, is it? I mean, it literally makes my blood boil.
Yeah.
Like, I think the average in the WSL now is 40. But I think there's this perception, especially because, you know, Luca and I are very lucky we work with some Lionesses, but like you say, we work with a lot of championship players, a lot of WSL players. And our championship players are just about scraping living. You can't get a boot deal for anyone. I mean, it's hard enough to get a boot deal for anyone who's not a Lioness.
Paid one.
A paid one, sorry, yeah, you can get free boots. But I just think there's this perception that because we have 60,000 people at the Emirates and it's all great, and don't get me wrong, it's amazing, but I still go to grounds and there's 2,000, or I still, you know, sometimes there's 400 of us. And, you know, we were laughing about our weekends and our Saturdays and Sundays, and there's this lovely, we've had some nice days out at Wembley, but we also generally are found, you know, with a cup of Bovril, not with my dog, unfortunately, but pretty, you know, it's not moved on that much.
Yeah.
And, you know, talking of boot deals, I remember maybe 5 years ago going to a big brand and they did not have a female ambassador, and I had to fight to get a female to get a paid boot deal.
Did they think because women wouldn't sell boots?
They thought women wouldn't sell boots. And even now, they only want a striker. You know, we'll say we've got this player and this player. We only want a striker or someone very young. And I get it. They've got to sell their stuff. But we have to invest in the whole of the game, I think is what we're trying to say, rather than, you know, we get brands coming to us saying, we've got this thing and we're just looking for a Lioness. And I'll be like, right, but I've got this player who plays at one of the top 4 clubs, but maybe she's at Scotland or maybe she's Welsh. Not interested.
Okay.
And that is part of the problem. When I was speaking to Maheta of the PFA on the panel about championship players, if they haven't played in the WSL, they're not members of the Players' Union and they can't phone up with some of these problems. And I mentor a player in the championship who's an international women's footballer, and she can't get any help from the PFA, but somebody who was a 16-year-old academy player 30 years ago can phone up the PFA and get help. So I'm not putting it all on him, by the way. He's new to the job. Not quite as new as you, my love. What else have you found, Amy, through the course of your research at Deloitte as to, you talk about maximising revenue. And we're, as Joe knows from us being with women in football since the very start, we've never been about, let's get together and have a moan about stuff and say how bad it is. We've always
Sorry,
been...
that was really negative of me.
No, but people need, we need to know
Yeah.
what the problems are so we can find solutions and so we can go, that's not right, let's do something about that. Or I know somebody who can do something about that. Let's get together and do something about it. That's what we're about. What else have you found, Amy, along those lines, about not just the issues that you found, but in terms of solutions and also the positivity of the potential commercial growth, which would then help Joe and Luca to be able to get those boot deals for their players?
Yeah, I think that's something we're really cautious of. Obviously, we're telling this story of growth and the revenues are growing massively, but we're also, you know, we keep it balanced with the recognition that, you know, that doesn't tell the whole story. You know, there's a lot of ownership funding at clubs, and there is this diversity of clubs from the top of the WSL all the way to the bottom of the Women's Championship that is quite stark. The things that we talk about to help deal with that are investment and regulation. So particularly with NUCO happening hopefully later this year, there is huge potential, and I think Colette was talking about that urgency earlier. The potential over the next 3 to 5 years is huge. And so there is a real need for clubs, or if it can't be the clubs, for other investment to come in to be able to take advantage of that huge opportunity, because by benefiting from the potential of NUCO, the broadcast deal, the central commercial deals that we hope to achieve, that investment can then flow down through the rest of the pyramid, which is critical to ensuring that it's an attractive on-pitch product and continues to attract that investment. But we also know in order to attract investment, investors love a bit of regulation. And so over the next few years, I do expect we'll see a lot more in terms of cost control that balances that competitive balance element with the financial sustainability of the game to ensure that it's an attractive investment opportunity.
caps on wages? Is there going to be an issue with if top clubs are going out and cherry picking the best players from around the world and putting, stacking fabulous amounts of talents on their bench as they're perfectly entitled to do? Is that something you envisage coming away from that to try to, spread the love of this talent throughout the league? Is that feasible?
I'm going to give you such a politician's answer here.
Oh, don't, man. Come on. We don't do politics.
It's a balance.
No, man. Come on, we're friends here. Come on. No one's listening.
But everyone in this room, everyone in the industry wants women to earn higher wages, but we want that to be sustainable. I don't want in the next 5 years for those clubs to not be able to fund those wages anymore, and to be even more loss-making. It needs to be linked to revenue and the growth in a way that they can continue to do that. I'm sorry.
Sustainability is not a negative thing. That's not a bad thing. That's all anybody who's worked in football has ever talked about. I've lost track of the number of times Kelly Simmons has talked about sustainability over the years, rightly so. And in other countries, especially in America, again, boom and bust, boom and bust. Yeah. Now they're trying to find a different way. WSL coming in 2011, trying to find a different way. And we're still trying to find the best way, aren't we? Because nothing's perfect yet. How do you see it going, Charlotte?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. So Amy said, I've come into this new, and there's talk of salary caps, there's talk of cost control. And it's hard as a club because ultimately we want the league to be really competitive, and 7-0s don't do anything for our league, they don't do anything for our teams, doesn't help us. Even if you're on the positive side and you're beating someone 7-0, doesn't make fans desperate to come and attend that fixture the following year. But at the same time, we need to be competitive in the market, and we need to be able to retain our lionesses and our top international talent, because if we don't have a product, if all those best players are playing in the NWSL because their salary cap is higher. So, balance is that, cheesy word, doesn't really mean anything, but ultimately, we have to ensure that we are really careful when we bring a salary cap in, that it doesn't handcuff the league and, tie clubs' arms behind their backs when we are trying to create a product that everybody wants to watch. That's why the Premier League in men's football is so successful, because top talent is there. We need to ensure we continue to compete. But like you said, if it's based on revenue, then the onus is on the clubs and the league to generate that revenue. And I have this conversation with our players. Agents are here. Players always, all of us want to be paid fairly and well for the things that we do and for our skills and expertise. But what I'm trying to get across to our players, and I think they understand, is we all need to pull harder together. So when there's a commercial appearance day, I need them to be, on it, positive, turning up, maximising, because that in turn helps us pay them fairly and appropriately and give them wage progression. So to me, they're not like mutually exclusive things where there's someone in the club over here bringing in money, like Jerry Maguire, and then there's the players just focusing on football. What we're trying to do at City is bring our players on that journey and say, ultimately, if you want wage progression, you got to work too. All of us are in it together. It's a team effort. We need to provide more for our partners so that when it comes to renewal, we have effectively over-delivered and they are desperate to re-sign at bigger numbers. So,
do players appreciate that?
They do, but at the same time, funny story is equally this summer, Aston Villa had their big commercial day prior to the season, and the club decided to put the big broadcast media day on the same day as they did a double session, gym session. And so come the broadcast day, naturally the players were cooked. So I think it's for me, one of the biggest things that's going to elevate the women's game is specific women's football people making women's football decisions. Across many of the big clubs, they have a lot of male football allies, and the badges do a tremendous amount for the women's team. But I think the specific roles that are separate to the men's team only elevate the women's club. Naturally, I'm at football games most weekends, following our players. Someone puts the Premier League on, I couldn't tell you who's, I do at the moment because it's really close, but I couldn't tell you who's sitting top of the league. I'm watching so much on the women's side, and I'm so intense on that side that I don't even have time to watch the men's side at times, or equally I don't have any interest when I'm watching football every weekend. So only imagining people that have to make those footballing decisions when they're trying to stay in touch with everything that's going on the men's side and trying to be fully in depth on the women's side as well, I can only imagine is incredibly challenging because I can't even watch a game. So, so yeah, I think that's going to be a huge element of growth. And like I said, there's been some tremendous allies from the men's side, and I imagine that they probably will still be overlooked by one organisation. But the implementation of people like Charlotte, that their sole responsibility is growing the women's side, is enormous. And sometimes we've seen way too many things that have been lost, or appointments that have been too naive or slack because they're not fully engrossed in the women's game.
Don't want to get you into trouble, Joe. I do. I don't. But you did.
Hoping for a quiet day.
There is not one of those these days. But when you deal with clubs, you deal with almost all the WSL clubs. You know all the people at all the clubs, basically. When you're dealing with them, are you thinking this person ever? Are you thinking this person isn't necessarily fully engaged in the women's side? They spent a lot of their time on something else, or are you dealing with people who are the right people in the right jobs in WSL clubs as a whole?
Remember, Joe, I did give you a nice lunch last week.
That's why
At Man City, they know exactly what they're
But only the last 3 months. There were shoppers before that.
I think it's been...
Structures, are they solid structures as far as you can see?
Some clubs have very solid structures and have the right people in the right roles. Some clubs, and you have to understand the landscape. I think it's very easy to be critical of some of the clubs who just don't have the finances or the infrastructure. So if you are an Arsenal, and Arsenal were brilliant and put in an infrastructure of staff and brought in brilliant staff a long time ago, we're now seeing the rewards from that. Some of the other clubs who, you know, whether they couldn't invest from the top down because they were just about struggling to be in the Premier League, or even Championship clubs that then had successful women's clubs. Championship clubs do not have the money of Premier League clubs, yet they're expected to be funding their women's club in the same way that we're asking an Arsenal or a Chelsea or a Man City to fund their club. So I think we've got to be careful at kind of casting a net across everyone and saying this is the same. Every club is unique, and that's where we're running so quickly, and we're expecting clubs to suddenly be on this platform, and it's been escalated since we won the Euros. We're expecting all these clubs to run at this professional level with 4 press officers per team or 4 commercial officers per team, and actually, is that up to the men's club to fund that for the women's club? I'm not sure. That's, you know, if you look at Michelle Kang investing in London City, that's really exciting, because that is a funding model and a business that is solely focusing on the women's club. And look, it's going to take years. It's going to take, I don't know, 5 years. However, I don't know what their business plan is. But I think there's so many discrepancies across all the clubs that it's very hard to go, women's football does this or women's football clubs are this, because they're all so unique.
And it's difficult also while we're still in the situation in this country and in Europe where we are looking for the larger slice of the pie from men's football. We don't want to be there long term, but you're looking at what you mentioned Michelle Kang is doing at London City Lionesses, really exciting, because she can make up the rules as she goes along. She can invest in whatever she wants. And she doesn't just talk a good game. What she's done at Washington Spirit, a standalone club that she owns in the United States, she brought in Dawn Scott, who many people know is sports scientist extraordinaire, was in charge of the FA's programme for the Lionesses and also for the United States World Cup winners. She brought her in to run that team, and what they are doing there, and I've spoken to Dawn about it, is extensive. The research that she's doing for this one club is extensive, whereas I think it's easy if you have a bit of money to go, oh, let's get a new striker or let's get so-and-so player, but they are building, as we would say, from the bottom up and giving the players they've got, some talented ones, the tools they need to be the best that they can be. You mentioned about the broadcast situation before and how, as we know, men's football, a lot of it, the broadcast money comes in and they make so much cash that way. Do you know much about the current situation in terms of the new broadcast deal, which is currently up for grabs?
I know it's expected to reach higher values, and hopefully that will drive more revenues for the women's game. The interesting point around the men's game this time is that broadcasters driven that revenue growth over the past how many years, but actually this year it flipped to commercial revenue driving the revenues, which is actually a really nice example of how we shouldn't just copy the men's game. They've done it this way for so long, and now they flipped their business model to actually be more like the women's game.
Ah, interesting. They're copying us. We have got some time for questions. We're not in quite as much of a rush as we usually are, and I can see lots of people in the room have been hanging on our panel's every word. Do we have some questions from the floor about the growth of the women's game, whether it's in this country? Everyone's quite shy today. I'm really surprised. Oh, there we go. Do we have a microphone? We don't have a microphone. Oh,
Just shout.
oh no, we do have a microphone. There we go. Would you mind saying who you are and who you work for? Thank you.
I'm Allie. I'm the head of product for Gemini Sports Analytics. We do data for sports teams and help them accelerate their data operations. So my question is about data. I'm curious, like what I've heard a lot on the women's side is there isn't that much data. Teams don't have a lot of infrastructure to be doing anything with that data, which isn't that unique. A lot of men's teams don't either. But I'm curious from both the agent and then Charlotte, from your perspective, like how you guys are thinking about using data to drive better decisions on the women's side specifically.
I think if I was really rich, I'd have internal data people doing data on my players, because the way it's going now is when we're approaching clubs to talk about players, one of the first things they say is, have you got some stats to send me? And it's quite hard for some of our players who play at clubs where they might not have access to that, where I'm going, I need your stats. I need any stat you can give me. Don't expect head of recruitment there to know much about you or to have seen you. Give me some stats, and they're at a loss. So yeah, we're kind of building that from scratch. But as a sort of business owner, if there was one area that I'd love to bring in-house, that's probably what I'd do.
Yeah, we use it, but not to the level that we probably should or could. Do we tell players when they're angling for a move to maybe concentrate on getting some of those percentages up? Yes, I have, but do they do it? No. But the other thing is you see teams like Brighton on the men's side that use a real thorough data model to recruit their players and operate their team, and they're trying to do that onto the women's side. I think it's quite tough in the women's game. I think the men's game is far deeper and there's a lot more available. I mean, we had a player even playing in the top tier of Sweden this weekend. She had the game of her life. She's American, and we sent it to some of the team out there of the US team, and they couldn't see it because it wasn't on Y-Scout. So I think it's tough. We do try to use it. I think it's still getting there though.
For us at Man City, we are really fortunate. We've got a well-developed football intelligence department, and they service our men's team and our women's team, which is fantastic. So I don't know if that's always been the case, but it's certainly the case now. So we're really lucky. We get a lot of insight from that team, but I think the key is having staff that can A, are open to using that information, and B, then know how to implement it. So that's something that we're working really hard on, is now we have that information available, how are we actually implementing it? How's it informing our practice, both on the pitch and off the pitch? I think if there's an area that we see growing, it's probably the resource around data for our performance services team. I know that the more data they have, the better they can look after our players, putting it simply. So I would say, yeah, really fortunate to have an established team, but always wanting more, but getting the right staff that can use it well.
And do you think that's the next thing is maybe the younger staff that come through be maybe more open to using this kind of data? You're nodding away, you think that's the case?
Yeah, I see that all the time. So yeah. I work with a lot of teams, and I've worked in a couple of different sport teams. Man City is actually the only WSL team that used a previous company I was at for optical tracking, which is really cool. But the younger staff, a lot of times it's a big problem with getting more entrenched coaches to understand it and use it, because they're way more intuition based, and they're like, I don't get it. So a lot of what I think about and work on is how do we bring those people closer together to understand and make data-informed decisions, not just data like telling you what to do.
I wonder in due course whether that might be part of coaching qualifications, would it? Is anyone in the room able to confirm or deny whether that might be an option going forwards, that this kind of stuff might be incorporated into coaching courses? No? Okay, no, just a thought. Anyway, I'll shut up. I really will shut up. What would you like? It doesn't make sense to you. Right, okay. Because if that's going to be a big part of the way forward, yeah.
In terms of coaching.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, Zara Shah from Man City. Just interested, I guess it's kind of related to data, but maybe from like the other point of view, so the fan side, or like what you think, what other markets can be tapped, because obviously the women's product we've spoken about in the other suite and stuff is very different, or can be very different to the men's game and their product and what they have to offer, and like what untapped markets, you know, you feel like should be kind of tapped into, like coming from an EDI perspective as well, specifically, you know, around having diversity on the pitch and off the pitch and in the stadiums, etc. I feel like, you know, particular areas can be worked on a lot more, and like what kind of priority should that be given, or what have you thought about that kind of, I don't know.
Zara, you said you weren't going to ask me any difficult questions. Then you've gone on.
I thought she was teeing you up for it.
Yeah, I know, she's looking right at me. You promised. Anyone else want to take this one? Look,
Yeah.
Unless you have any thoughts on it that you want to share. It doesn't have to be a question to the panel, you
Yeah.
can just make your point.
Yeah, like I think focusing on kind of underrepresented communities and getting them, you know, representation on the pitch. And I think the women's game is a kind of maybe a good area to start with, since there's a very huge lack of kind of diversity that's been noted, but also possibly have, you know, easier access to those communities by, you know, because the men's game is so far away and so, like, you know, people see that that's not attainable. Maybe we can show that it is attainable in the women's game, and bring, especially like, you know, the crowds as well, bringing those crowds into the stadium where you have a much more family-friendly environment in the women's game. You know, I've brought in a lot of South Asian women and Muslim women, you know, work at City, where they appreciate that, you know, actually there is room for us here. There's not all men kind of, you know, being horrible to, you know, everybody, like hooligans or whatever. There's a lot more of a friendly atmosphere. You know, there's places to pray. There's, you know, baby changing facilities. You know, there's so much more that's family friendly that can be appealing to those kind of communities. I think is a huge kind of market potential. And I don't know, I just thought.
I think that's such good points, and I think you're completely right. I think it's on the clubs and on us, everyone who works in football, that when those things are happening, we have to talk about them, because the perception will still be, I've got to go to the Emirates. And you might, you know, if you're a young woman in London who's never accessed a football stadium, you may not feel that place is for you. And I think we have a real responsibility, and some clubs are brilliant at it and some clubs do less work, and it might come back to staff or a resource, but at going out into the communities and saying this place is for you. So I think you're exactly right, but I think we have to take that responsibility on ourselves, whether we're club or whether we work in the industry, to bring people with us and bring them in. And if clubs are doing that, we all have a collective responsibility to talk about it, because, you know, like I had a baby last year, and I've yet to find, there was one ground, I went to Leicester last week, which had baby changing, and I literally have been changing the baby on disabled toilets, floors, or in a box, because that's what they offer. And I'm horrified. Why didn't I know? But I'm like, why did no one tell me this before? Like, if I'd have known about this, I would have made a fuss about this. Why has it taken me to have a baby to try and access these areas? It shouldn't be on me to get there and go, oh God, this is not the right place for me and my child. So I would think it's on all of us to A, make that happen, but B, shout about it when it does happen.
I think from a playing perspective, the tough thing is for the elite pathway, the ETCs are very spread out, and so we were fortunate enough that my dad was able to take less an hour and a half each way to go to Chelsea twice, 3 times a week. Molly Pike, one of my players, was in Southampton travelling to Chelsea, and she actually her dad bought her a place so that she could do sixth form at a local school. But not everybody can do that. So access is incredibly important. And so, you know, we're actually looking at doing something with Alessia, with Arsenal, that enables some players to be able to get out to the training centres from underprivileged areas. Because that is one of the key things. Lioness has got absolutely slaughtered for over the summer. And the fundamental thing is, you look at the Premier League clubs, they all have academies. There's plenty of them. There's 12 WSL clubs, there's 20-odd Premier League clubs, plus the Championship League One. So there's far more centres of excellence for the boys to tap into. For the women, there isn't as many. And so getting out to these talented centres, access to good coaching is challenging.
But that's, again, like going back to London City, and I don't mean to keep coming back to them, but they're just kind of fresh in my mind, that I'm so excited. I had a conversation with them about where they base themselves, and I was like, do not go anywhere outside Millwall or the Isle of Dogs, because we need, like, those inner city areas need to be served. Don't go down to Kent, like.
But it's also it's in their interest, because there's so much talent.
Untapped area.
They can't get out to leafy suburbs. But I think those clubs, the likes of Arsenal and Chelsea, are addressing that, aren't they? They're fully aware of it and
absolutely,
and are addressing it. It's just Rome wasn't built in a day, but they are. But like you say, I mean, think of the talent that's being missed out on.
Isn't that also the outreach work with schools, and because with schools and stuff, because obviously we know there's a big gap from the clubs, because there's a big gap from the top to the bottom. But if girls don't have access to schools, if they can't play from 5 years old, they're not going to be at the level they need to be by 15 when these clubs are picking them up.
But it goes a level deeper, I think, as well, because the clubs can only sign these players at 18 years old. So they're being asked to invest in their academies from right the way down the pyramid, but they're at jeopardy of losing those talents because they can go off anywhere and go somewhere else and become a superstar. So there's a real break in the rules somewhere, because the FA is asking a lot of these clubs to invest in their academies and do the outreach and all that sort of stuff, but there's no security to any of these talents. So when I said earlier about bringing the pyramid from the bottom up as well, Chelsea, Arsenal, clubs like that do very well and have greater means to be able to do that. But it's the clubs like West Ham and in these areas that they don't necessarily have as great a means or reach to be able to do that. They need the security of those talents that they're training up.
Yeah, those players can just go for nothing, all that training that's gone in. Apart from in Scotland, isn't that different in Scotland? I think it's 16 in Scotland. Anyway, that's another matter. Thank you. Oh, we've got to really quickly, Pippa, really quickly, really quick.
I've got a question for Charlotte.
Okay, really quick. Oh, poor Charlotte. She's like,
I'm going to try and run through this. So a few years ago, I think 2019, I was covering a Man City women's game at the Academy Stadium at 12:30. Then they had a men's game at the Etihad Stadium, and all the fans walked over the bridge. It was like a double game day. Yeah. Do you think that would be a good idea going forward as this one club mantra to grow the women's game, to have a double game day? I know it's long and tiring, but do you think that's something going forward or no?
No, it's a really good question, and one that we talk about. I think we've got complexities on the site in terms of stewarding post-COVID in particular. I think for a lot of clubs is really challenging. So I think from an operational point of view, it's difficult, but look, nothing's off the table for us. And if you get small fans, then we're going to do it.
Charlotte, thank you and well done.
Thank you.
Take a photo. Very bold of Charlotte to show up and answer any old questions for the likes of me. It's really hard and very good questions.
I was thinking, when people put in pictures and you go, oh, that was them like 15 years ago, they don't look like that anymore. Well, that's definitely, that was me when I was, 13, 14.
That ship sailed.
Sorry.
Sorry, it's terrible. Thank you so much to Amy. Thank you to Luca. Late call up, but brilliant. And Joe, as ever, thank you so much. Well done.